This is HCR Hinckley Community Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to my Ghost Stories and Legends by Eve from Afterlife Nights Paranormal. The Witch of Burslem-Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, Molly Lee, 1685 to 1746, was an English woman who was accused of witchcraft, died before being tried, and had her grave disturbed following claims that she still haunted the towns. The 20th century witch Sybil Leek claimed to be a descendant of Lee's and took to keeping a crow named Mr. Hotfoot Jackson around with her, just like Lee had done. Early life, Lee was born in 1685 in a cottage on the edge of the moors at Burslem, now one of the towns of Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. She was a solitary character who made a living selling milk from her herd of cows to travellers and passersby. She was an eccentric person who kept a pet blackbird. The bird often sat on her shoulder when she brought milk into Burslem to sell to the dairy. She was known for her quick temper, and the people of Burslem were very suspicious of her. This was not surprising, as throughout the country, women, particularly elderly women, who lived on their own in remote places were often labelled as witches. Witchcraft in Lee's case, it was the local parson, Reverend Spencer, who made the accusation. He claimed that Lee sent her blackbird to sit on the sign of the Turk's Head pub that the parson frequently visited, and that the bird's presence was responsible for turning the beer sour. Lee was also blamed for other ailments suffered by the townsfolk. Death. Lee died in 1746 and was buried in Burslem churchyard, but there were claims that her ghost haunted the town. Spencer, along with clerics from Stoke, Walthamstow, and Newcastle-under-Lyme, exhumed her body, opened the coffin, and threw in the still-living blackbird that had been her companion. They then reburied Molly in a north to south direction, at a right angle to all the other graves in the churchyard. Mythology. There are stories that her ghost appeared to walk the streets of Burslem, apologising for her sins. Further stories claim that her spirit was exorcised by a group of several priests, and that while it was successful, some of them died in the process. Some claim that if one skips around her grave 3 times chanting the mantra, Molly Lee, chase me around the apple tree, her spirit will return. These ghost stories are still told to young children to this day. Eyam, Derbyshire, the real village of the damned. All it took was a contaminated bale of cloth to kill off almost an entire village. Eyam, known as the Plague Village of Derbyshire, was ravaged by disease during the Great Plague of 1666, when the cloth sent up from plague-ridden London and teeming with fleas was hung to dry by a local tailor. It unleashed pain and pestilence upon the whole village. The plague, caused by bites from infected rats and fleas, left sufferers keeled over, vomiting and spluttering as they bled uncontrollably and their skin turned black. George Vickers, the tailor's assistant, who hung the infected cloth, was the first of 260 people to die during the outbreak in the village. But among the unimaginable horror of the disease, which spread like wildfire in the summer sun, the villagers took an incredible brave stance to save others from their own fate. William Mompesson, the town's rector, watched in fear as villagers began to pack up their things and prepared to flee the plagued town. So he enlisted the help of an exiled reverend called Thomas Stanley to intervene and implore the villagers to do something remarkable. On 24th of June 1666, Mompesson called Eyam's residents together and begged them to quarantine themselves so that the disease couldn't spread into neighbouring settlements. Incredibly, the whole town vowed to sacrifice their lives to stop the pestilence which had been festering in Eyam from claiming any more lives. By August, the sweltering heat of an unusually hot summer pushed the villagers to desperation. Mothers buried their own children, and husbands buried their wives as outsiders watched from a nearby hill, too scared to come any closer to residents of the plagued town. Mompesson remarked that his wife, Catherine, had noticed a sickly sweet smell in the air the day before she died, while he described the stench of sadness and death in letters from beyond the cordon. But come November, the plague died down, without having spread further, meaning the town's sacrifice had saved countless lives. Today, rumours swirl that the town is haunted by the ghosts of those who were claimed by the plague epidemic. Unexplained footsteps allegedly echo around the Miners' Arms pub. But in a village where every house is adorned with plaques bearing the names of plague victims, it's impossible to know whose steps they are. Guests who stay at the inn have reported the doors opening and slamming mysteriously, accompanied by a chorus of ghostly giggling. At Eyam Hall, Sarah Mills, a servant girl who drowned in the village well, has reportedly been sighted, and understandably, visitors say they can't walk past the headstones dotted around the surrounding areas without feeling chills. The Plague Pit. Kate's Hole. In November 1647, an Italian lady named Meg Brown from Manchester came to Rushton Grange Estate, which is now Cobridge area. She was a beautiful lady who had a lovely singing voice, so the locals nicknamed her Singing Kate. She was being employed by Francis Biddulph, the owner of the estate, in the capacity of a governess, childminder, housekeeper. Unbeknownst to everyone, Kate had brought the plague with her to Cobridge. She died horribly. Then one of the children died. Then others in the household died. Francis and his other son fled to London. Within 3 months of Kate's arrival, 8,000 people in Stoke-on-Trent and the surrounding areas died of plague too. Kate and the other child and the household were denied burial in a churchyard, and so instead were buried in Cobridge in a plague pit, nicknamed Kate's Hole. People in this area have reported that they have heard Kate's ghostly voice from the plague pit singing along with the children. Here is a local urban legend set in the Staffordshire area, which is recorded in local history books. Whether true or myth, it is still a talking point in the local area to this day. The legend of the Boone Hill Bear. Mrs. Phillips died at the age of 83. She would have been 15 years old and living in the mining village of Bignell End at the time of the recorded events. On January the 12th, 1918, two young colliers employed at the mini pit, Halmer End, set off for the colliery. As usual, they took a shortcut by walking over Boone Hill. As they approached the summit, where there were some small trees and bushes, they could not believe their eyes, for a huge bear came out from the trees and started to come after them. All thought of continuing on their way to Halmer End was put out of their minds, and they dropped their lunchboxes and ran for their dear lives, not looking back till they reached the safety of Bignell End and home. Later that day, the tragic news was brought to the people of Bignell End of the terrible mine disaster at the mini pit, with the largest loss of life ever recorded in North Staffordshire. When word got round of the remarkable escape the two young miners had, and of the appearance of the bear on Boone Hill, search parties combed the locals' countryside, and inquiries were made far and wide, but no trace of the bear could be found. There had been no instance of such a beast escaping from a circus or travelling fair. The bear seemed to have vanished. Towards the end of the 12th century, Hugh de Audley set out from Healy Castle for a day's hunting. In the afternoon, the party had reached the neighbourhood of Boone Hill. Near its summit, the young Lord Hugh saw a bear in a clearing. He got ready his bow and was about to take aim, when his squire observed that it was a female bear, and had with her a young cub. He pointed this out to his master, who, being a kind man despite a hard exterior, put away his bow and returned to the castle, putting off any further hunting till another day. Could it be that the two young colliers were descendants of Hugh of Audley, and the bear, or its apparition, had reappeared that day to save the miners from destruction, thereby repaying an ancient debt? We will never know. All we have is this fascinating legend, as recounted above.
The Tinder date that went horribly wrong. I went on a Tinder date a couple of years ago. Everything started out relatively normal. We met at a nice downtown restaurant for dinner. She was even prettier in person and the conversation was flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realise she was a super private person. For example, she would not tell me her last name, where she worked, or say anything about her family. She made it clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I don't blame her. I shrugged it off and the date continued. She took great interest in the fact that I was in a seminary studying to be a pastor. That was nice because usually that's a deal breaker for most women, at least in my experience. Towards the end of our meal, she confessed something to me. "I have something to tell you," she said, "but please don't think I'm crazy." I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. She explained that she recently moved into a new apartment. She lived alone, which was also a new thing. Though she couldn't put her finger on it, she was convinced there was a presence of a sinister and paranormal nature in her apartment. She had hardly slept since she moved in because she was plagued with constant nightmares and strange occurrences. I could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. She seemed quite sincere. "I can tell you're a good guy," she said. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy and had a calming feeling. "I know how this sounds, but would you please come home with me tonight? Honestly, I'm just scared to go back there alone. I am not looking for sex." I was really taken aback by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a beautiful woman whom I just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she'd picked a really odd way to initiate sex. Either way, the night would be interesting. We talked for a little bit longer and I agreed to spend the night with her. I followed her home, and when I walked into her apartment, I was immediately struck with bad vibes. There was just something ominous about the place. I didn't want to freak her out, so I kept those feelings to myself. I said a quick prayer and followed her to the bedroom. She wasn't kidding about the sex. I tried my luck, but was met with a swift rejection. We kissed and cuddled for a bit, nothing too crazy, and then she fell asleep. I just laid there for a while in a silent darkness, lost in thought. Sometime later, I 100% heard someone walking down the hallway outside the bedroom. The door was closed, however, I couldn't see anything. I was definitely frightened, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I went to investigate. Slowly, I opened the door. I looked to my left, then to my right. Nothing. I walked downstairs to check out the rest of the apartment. Nothing. I went back upstairs to check the bathroom and the guest room. Nothing. When I walked out of the guest room, which was right across my date's bedroom, I looked to my left and right. At the end of the hallway, I saw a black, humanoid body standing there, perfectly still. It was almost like a shadow, but I could discern that it was a three-dimensional figure. This figure was large in stature. There's no way it could have been my date. She was maybe 5'1" at best. I ran back into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't in bed where I left her. I called out her name, but there was no response. I had just walked through the entire apartment, so it literally made no sense to me that she wasn't there. The bed was low to the ground, so she couldn't be under it. The closet was open too, and it was packed with boxes, so I knew she wasn't there either. The window was shut tight. Plus it was a second story. It was as if she vanished. I grabbed my wallet, keys and cell phone and ran out of the apartment in nothing but my underwear. The shadowy figure was gone. I jumped in my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. Till this day I have no idea what the hell happened that night. I also never went back to her apartment, mostly because I'm horrible with directions, and she lived in the next town over. This was easily one of the most terrifying, inexplicable things I've ever experienced.
I hope you enjoyed the stories tonight. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. See you again soon for the next chapter of Ghost Stories and Legends. Good night. I just want to say as well a quick thank you to Paul Jepson for all these fabulous stories. Please listen soon and we'll have another load for you. Take care, good night, and sleep well. Bye-bye.